Hello there, Ancient Earth documentary here. Imagine standing on the edge of a frozen ocean where the water temperature sits below what should be physically possible for liquid to exist. Below you, in absolute darkness, something moves, something enormous. Why would the coldest, most hostile waters on Earth produce the largest creatures in their ecosystems? Antarctica defies every biological rule we've learned. In warm tropical seas, life explodes in vibrant bursts of colour and speed. Everything moves fast, eats constantly, and dies young. Cold should slow everything down, shrink it, make survival harder. That's the logical assumption. Every biology textbook will tell you that metabolism slows in cold environments, that growth rates plummet, that size becomes a liability when energy is scarce. The Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica operates by different physics. The same crushing cold that should strangle life instead nurtures giants. Sea spiders the size of dinner plates crawl across the seafloor. Isopods grow to the dimensions of footballs. Colossal squid with eyes like basketballs hunt in permanent darkness. These aren't exceptions or anomalies. They're the rule. This phenomenon has a name, polar gigantism. But naming something doesn't explain it. For decades, scientists struggled to understand why evolution would favour massive body sizes in an environment that seems designed to punish them. The answer isn't simple. It's not one factor, but a perfect storm of chemistry, physics, and evolutionary pressure that only exists in these specific conditions. We need to start where the giants live, beneath a ceiling of ice that never fully melts. The Antarctic continent itself is a desert, not metaphorically, literally. The interior receives less precipitation than the Sahara. What moisture exists has been locked into ice for millions of years, building layers that in some places exceed 4 kilometers thick. The weight of this ice actually deforms the bedrock below, pressing the landmass down into the Earth's mantle. Wind screams across this frozen plateau at velocities that would strip flesh from bone. Temperatures drop so low that exposed metal becomes brittle and shatters. During the 6-month polar night, darkness is absolute. No twilight, no glow from distant cities, nothing but black sky and white ice extending to every horizon. This is the world above. Life here is virtually non-existent. A few microscopic organisms cling to existence in rock crevices. Some bacteria survive in frozen states, metabolically dormant. But complex life, forget it. The surface of Antarctica is as close to Mars as you can get while standing on Earth. But the ocean tells a different story. Sea ice forms differently than glacial ice. It's born from the ocean itself, from salt water that freezes as temperatures plunge during the long winter. This ice spreads outward from the continent's edge, doubling Antarctica's visible size. It's not a solid sheet, but a dynamic, shifting mosaic of flows that grind against each other with slow geological force. The key detail is what this ice does to the water below. It creates a lid, not just a physical barrier, but an optical one. When sea ice grows thick and gets covered by snow, it blocks virtually all sunlight. Even during the brief Antarctic summer when the sun circles the sky for 24 hours straight, less than 1% of that light penetrates to the water below. This creates an underwater world, living in near constant twilight or complete darkness. For 6 months, photosynthesis essentially stops. The base of the food web goes dormant. Everything that lives here must survive through the longest, darkest night imaginable. And somehow they do more than survive. They thrive. The water temperature tells part of the story. Normal ocean water freezes at roughly minus 1.8 degrees Celsius. The Southern Ocean hovers right at that threshold, held in liquid form only by its salt content. This isn't just cold. It's a state of aggressive super chill. The water is constantly trying to freeze. Every surface, every organism, Every current is fighting against the fundamental physics that want to turn liquid into solid. For any creature living here, existence is a chemical battle. Their bodies are surrounded by water that wants to kill them at a molecular level. Ice crystals forming inside cells would puncture membranes, burst tissue, end life instantly. To prevent this, Antarctic organisms have evolved biological antifreeze, special proteins that circulate through their blood and tissues, seeking out the first microscopic seed crystals of ice and stopping them from growing. This is the price of admission. To live here, you must constantly expend energy just to remain liquid. You must produce and maintain these antifreeze compounds in concentrations high enough to protect every cell, every capillary, every delicate membrane from the water trying to freeze it solid. The cold is relentless. The darkness is absolute. The chemistry is hostile. By every measure, this should produce tiny, simple, desperate organisms barely clinging to existence. Instead, it produces giants. The explanation begins with a counterintuitive fact about cold water. It holds more dissolved gas than warm water, significantly more. A warm tropical ocean is relatively oxygen poor. The warmer the water, the less gas it can physically contain. It's the same reason a warm soda goes flat. Heat drives gas out of solution. Cold water is the opposite. It's a sponge for dissolved gases. And the Southern Ocean isn't just cold. It's violently churned by some of the strongest winds on Earth. The surface is constantly being mixed, aerated, oxygenated. The result is water that's supersaturated with dissolved oxygen. For a gill-breathing animal, this changes everything. In warm water, a fish or crustacean is in constant energetic struggle. Its gills must work hard to extract the limited oxygen available. Size becomes a liability because a larger body needs more oxygen. But gill surface area doesn't scale proportionally. Eventually, you hit a ceiling where the respiratory system simply can't support more mass. But in the oxygen-rich Antarctic water, that ceiling disappears. A simple, even inefficient respiratory system can pull enough oxygen to fuel a large body. The bottleneck is removed. The fuel is abundant. This explains how a giant can exist. But it doesn't explain why evolution would favor gigantism. Abundant oxygen makes large size possible, but why would it be advantageous? The answer lies in the second effect of cold: metabolic slowdown. Temperature controls the speed of chemical reactions. This is fundamental physics. In a cold-blooded organism, the surrounding water temperature directly determines internal temperature. And as temperature drops, metabolism slows dramatically. Imagine life in a warm tropical reef. Metabolism burns hot and fast. Fish grow quickly, reproduce quickly, die young. It's a high-energy, high-turnover system. Everything happens at sprint speed. Antarctic life exists in slow motion. A giant sea spider's heart might beat only a few times per minute. Moving a single leg can take an hour. Large isopods sit motionless for weeks, their internal systems barely ticking over. This isn't hibernation, it's normal operation. Their metabolic fire isn't burning low because they're conserving energy. It's burning low because the cold has locked their biochemistry into its slowest possible gear. From our warm-blooded perspective, this looks like death. But from a survival standpoint in this environment, it's genius. A hot, fast metabolism is wasteful. It burns through enormous amounts of fuel just to maintain basic functions. A slow, cold metabolism is incredibly efficient. It requires minimal food to keep running. In an environment where food is scarce, where the base of the food web shuts down for 6 months every year, efficiency isn't optional. It's survival. A fast metabolism creature dropped into Antarctic waters would burn through its energy reserves and starve within days. The slow burners can wait out the long dark winter on almost nothing. This metabolic efficiency also creates an unexpected benefit. Slow burning fires last longer. The chemical reactions of life proceed with such patient slowness that they produce fewer damaging byproducts. The free radicals and metabolic waste that cause aging in warm-blooded creatures accumulate far more slowly here. The result? Profound longevity. A small tropical crustacean might live a single frantic year. Its Antarctic cousin can live for decades. The Greenland shark, a close relative of the Antarctic sleeper shark, can live for centuries, 400 years, 500. Individual sharks alive today were born before the Industrial Revolution. This longevity solves the growth paradox. How do you become a giant when you grow at a glacial pace? You live long enough for that slow growth to accumulate. Many Antarctic organisms have indeterminate growth. They never truly stop growing. As long as they're alive and have food, they continue adding size however slowly. A sea spider might grow only millimeters per year. But if it lives for a century, those millimeters become a dinner plate-sized creature that began life as a speck. Size becomes time made visible. The cold provides the fuel through oxygen saturation. The cold provides the efficiency through metabolic slowdown. The efficiency provides time through extended lifespan. And time provides the opportunity for slow, patient, cumulative growth to produce giants. But there's still a missing piece. This system only works if the giants can actually obtain enough food. We've described a world of scarcity, of darkness, of a food web that shuts down for half the year. How does anything accumulate the calories needed to build massive bodies? The answer is that Antarctic life doesn't experience constant scarcity. It experiences violent extremes. 6 months of absolute famine, followed by 6 months of explosive, almost unimaginable abundance. When the sun returns after the long polar night, it doesn't set again for 6 months. It circles the horizon 24 hours a day, pouring constant solar energy into nutrient-rich water. The ocean has spent the entire winter accumulating deep water nutrients brought up by powerful currents. Now it has unlimited sunlight and unlimited fertilizer. The result is a biological explosion. Microscopic algae bloom in densities that turn the entire Southern Ocean green and brown. The transformation happens in days. Clear blue water becomes thick soup teeming with single-celled life. Feeding on this bloom is Antarctic krill. These small shrimp-like creatures swarm in numbers that defy comprehension. A single superswarm can be miles wide, miles long, hundreds of meters deep. It's a living river containing trillions of individuals. The total biomass of Antarctic krill likely exceeds the combined mass of all humans on Earth. This is the feast. For 6 months, the ocean transforms into an endless buffet. Every creature must eat enough during this window to survive the next 6-month famine. A giant body isn't a liability, it's a storage tank. Large isopods can gorge on a whale carcass and survive for years on that single meal. Giant fish pack their tissues with oil-rich fats that fuel them through the dark months. The boom and bust cycle doesn't just allow gigantism, it demands it. Small creatures with limited storage capacity cannot survive the winter. Size becomes the ultimate survival strategy. We've now assembled the complete picture. Oxygen-saturated water provides fuel. Cold-locked metabolism provides efficiency. Efficiency provides longevity. Longevity provides time for growth. The feast or famine cycle makes large size necessary for survival. But there's one final ingredient that makes Antarctic gigantism possible. One crucial factor that allowed this slow, patient, vulnerable system to evolve without being crushed by predators. For millions of years, the Antarctic remained isolated from the modern ocean's most efficient killers. The circumpolar current that circles the continent isn't just a flow of water. It's a thermal barrier, a fortress wall of cold that prevented warm water predators from invading. Specifically, it kept out the crabs. In tropical and temperate oceans, fast-moving crabs with powerful crushing claws dominate. Any slow creature, any soft-bodied creature any weakly armored creature becomes an immediate meal. Survival demands speed, intelligence, or an impenetrable shell. But these modern predators never crossed the Antarctic thermal barrier. Their metabolisms couldn't handle the cold. For tens of millions of years, the Antarctic remained a Paleozoic refuge, an ancient garden where the old rules still applied. Here, slowness wasn't a death sentence. Delicate structures could evolve without being shattered. Glass sponges could build fragile crystal forests. Sea spiders could grow enormous without needing armor or speed. The absence of crushing predation was as important as any other factor. This isolation created a unique evolutionary laboratory, a place where life could experiment with strategies that would be instantly punished elsewhere. The result is an ecosystem unlike any other on Earth, a kingdom of slow, patient, ancient giants living beneath the ice. Now we descend to meet them. The skeletal sea spider lifts one impossibly thin leg, places it down with balletic precision, then waits. Minutes pass before the next movement begins. This is how giants move when their entire body operates at the temperature of a dying glacier. Below it, pressed against the muddy seafloor, something else stirs. Not delicate, not skeletal, heavy. The giant Antarctic isopod resembles a pillbug that evolution decided to upsize into something nightmarish. Imagine the small grey creature you'd find curled under a garden stone. Now scale it to the length of your forearm. Encase it in overlapping plates of bone-hard armor. Give it dozens of clicking legs and a tail shield broad as a dinner plate. This is Glyptonotus antarcticus, a walking fortress built for one purpose: waiting. Its armor isn't decorative. Each segmented plate interlocks with surgical precision, creating a mobile bunker that can survive pressures that would crush human bones to paste. The head is a solid shield. The eyes, if they function at all in this eternal dark, are simple dots barely registering shadows. Everything about this creature screams medieval warfare, except it doesn't wage war. It waits. The isopod's metabolism burns so slowly that calling it alive feels generous. It can sit motionless for weeks without moving a single leg. Months pass like afternoons. Energy conservation isn't strategy here, it's religion. What does it eat during this endless vigil? Marine snow. The faint, constant drizzle of organic debris falling from the summer world miles overhead. Dead plankton, fecal pellets, fragments of decomposing creatures, nutritional dust. Each particle provides almost nothing. A single calorie might take hours to digest, but the isopod doesn't need much. Its cold-locked metabolism sips energy like a miser counting coins in the dark. Then something changes. Far above, beyond the ice ceiling, beyond the midnight zone, a whale dies. Perhaps age, perhaps injury. Its massive body, no longer buoyant, begins the long, silent descent. It falls for a day, maybe two, finally impacts the abyssal plain with a soft thud that sends ripples through the mud. This is the banquet. A single whale carcass represents more calories than the isopod encounters in decades. It's a mountain of fat and protein delivered directly to the seafloor. And somehow, from kilometers away, the isopods know. They sense it, perhaps through chemical traces spreading slowly through the ancient currents, perhaps through pressure waves. The mechanism doesn't matter. What matters is they come. Dozens of them, then hundreds, crawling across the dark plain in a slow-motion pilgrimage. Each journey takes days, some travel for weeks, but they converge with mathematical precision on this single gift from the surface. When they arrive, they feast. Their simple grinding mouthparts tear at the tough cold flesh. They burrow into the carcass like armored miners excavating treasure. The feeding continues for months, year They gorge until their specialized digestive tracts swell to capacity. A single isopod might consume enough during one whalefall to survive 5 years, maybe longer. Its giant body isn't built for aggression. It's built for storage. A living, walking pantry designed to capitalize completely on rare moments of impossible abundance. This is the key to understanding Antarctic gigantism. Size isn't about dominance, it's about patience, about having enough internal volume to store sufficient energy to outlast the darkest winters. The isopod's armor, useless against modern crushing predators, works perfectly here. No crabs exist to shatter its shell. No advanced fish burrow through its defenses. Only the simple grasping attacks of sea spiders or the vacuum-like mouths of sleeper sharks pose any threat. And against those, medieval plate armor holds just fine. After gorging, the isopod retreats, returns to its patient vigil, settles back into the mud to wait another decade for the next windfall. But it's not alone on this dark plain. Moving through the water column above, propelled by the gentlest undulation imaginable, drifts another kind of survivor. Not armored, not skeletal, something in between. The Antarctic grenadier materializes from darkness like a half-formed thought. Its front half suggests a fish, large head, robust body, overslung mouth designed for vacuum feeding, but the back half simply dissolves. Tapers into an impossibly long, thin, whip-like tail that fades into nothing. As if evolution got bored halfway through designing it and wandered off. This strange geometry serves a purpose. The grenadier is the ocean's most efficient swimmer. It doesn't beat its tail, doesn't thrash, just ripples its fins in slow hypnotic waves that propel it forward with almost zero energy cost. It hangs neutrally buoyant in the freezing black, waiting. Its entire pale body functions as a chemical antenna, tasting the water for the faintest dissolved traces of food. When it detects something, a tiny copepod, a drifting krill, it doesn't chase, doesn't pursue, just drifts closer and inhales. The mouth extends like a gentle vacuum, drawing the prey in without violence. This is hunting stripped to its most efficient essence. No wasted movement, no unnecessary energy expenditure, pure patient collection. The grenadier's success lies in accepting limitations. It will never be fast, never be aggressive, never dominate through strength. Instead, it masters the art of existing on almost nothing. In a world where photosynthesis stops for half the year, where food arrives as faint dust or rare windfalls, efficiency becomes the only viable strategy. And the grenadier has perfected it. Its pale, almost translucent skin lacks all pigment. No point wasting energy producing colors nobody can see. Its eyes, oversized for gathering the faintest bioluminescent sparks, scan constantly for opportunities. But even the grenadier, abundant and successful, isn't the true king of this dark realm. Something else moves here. Something ancient. Something that operates on a timescale closer to geology than biology. The sleeper shark. Imagine a shadow detaching from deeper darkness, not moving, drifting. A massive cylindrical bulk of grey flesh that seems less like a living predator and more like a piece of the abyss, given form. This is Somniosus antarcticus, close relative of the famous Greenland shark, an apex predator that has abandoned almost everything we associate with hunting. It's colossal, 6 meters, 20 feet, perhaps longer, but there's nothing sleek about it. The body is heavy, almost flaccid, the fins small and paddle-like, the snout blunt, and the eyes. In its northern cousins, those eyes are often colonized by parasitic copepods, small crustaceans that attach to the cornea and glow with faint bioluminescent light. Picture this 20-foot grey giant drifting through absolute darkness, guided by 2 tiny glowing green lanterns where its eyes should be. But the most unsettling feature is the speed, or lack of it. The sleeper shark doesn't swim. It barely moves. Researchers have clocked its cruising speed at 1 or 2 kilometers per hour. A gentle walking pace. Its heart beats perhaps 3 times per minute. By every measure, this creature is barely alive. Its metabolism burns so slowly it seems suspended between life and hibernation. So, how does something this slow hunt? Stealth. A predator moving this slowly makes no sound, creates no electrical field, disturbs no water. It's a ghost. A drifting shadow that announces nothing. It simply materializes beside sleeping fish and inhales them. The mouth extends with sudden localized power, creating a vacuum that draws prey in before they register the threat. But its true role mirrors the isopods. It's the ocean's ultimate opportunist. Its stomach contents reveal fish, seals, penguins. Even in northern relatives, polar bears and reindeer, it doesn't hunt these creatures in any traditional sense. It finds them, scavenges them, drifts through its centuries-long life encountering carcasses and consuming them with patient efficiency. Because that's the final secret. This creature, this slow, cold, drifting log, is the longest-lived vertebrate on Earth. Greenland sharks, its Arctic cousins, can live 400 years, 500, perhaps longer. An individual alive today might have been born when Shakespeare was writing plays. This is the ultimate expression of the Antarctic recipe. Not rapid growth, but geological patience. A life lived at the speed of melting ice, accumulating size year by year, decade by decade, century by century. The sleeper shark is the quiet king, ancient, blind, glowing faintly in the dark, but even it isn't the strangest resident of this abyssal realm. Rising from the muddy seafloor, utterly motionless, are structures that seem to defy biology entirely. Vast, intricate lattices of ghostly white, delicate as lace, hard as stone. These are the glass sponges, not plants, animals, but animals that abandon movement entirely, that traded action for architecture, that built themselves from silica, the fundamental component of glass. Each sponge is a living sculpture. Some grow meters tall, meters wide, forming complex three-dimensional thickets that resemble alien chandeliers or impossibly delicate woven vessels. They cover square kilometers of sea floor, glass forests in the dark. The mystery isn't just their structure, it's their age. A large glass sponge doesn't live for decades, not centuries, millennia. Scientists estimate lifespans of 5,000 years, 10,000, perhaps 15,000. Imagine a single living organism that began filtering Antarctic water before humans built the pyramids. That was alive when woolly mammoths still walked the earth. These aren't fossils, they're living monuments. Their growth is measured in micrometers per year. Life lived at the speed of eroding rock. But because they grow so slowly, they endure almost forever. The Antarctic water provides everything they need. Abundant dissolved silica for building their glass skeletons, supercharged oxygen for their minimal metabolism, and most crucially, the complete absence of predators. In any temperate ocean, these fragile structures would be instantly shattered. Crabs would bulldoze through them. Fish would burrow into them. Within days, they'd be reduced to shards. But here, in this ancient predator-free garden, they're safe. They build their silent glass cathedrals, undisturbed for thousands of years. Their delicate branches provide vital structure in the flat, muddy void. They become apartment buildings for tiny, brittle stars, small crustaceans, larval fish. Entire communities shelter within their crystal palaces. The glass sponges are the final proof of Antarctica's unique isolation. A world where fragility survives through the simple absence of violence. These are the masters of the deep, dark floor. The skeletal spiders, the armored isopods, the ghostly fish, the ancient sharks, the eternal glass forests. Each has solved the riddle of the abyss in their own patient way. But the Antarctic Ocean isn't just an abyss. Its most vibrant ecosystem exists in a completely unexpected place. We must now leave the deep, dark bottom and travel upward, past miles of empty black water, all the way to the other great habitat. We must travel to the ceiling. Floating just beneath the groaning, shifting sea ice lid, the underwater sky reveals something shocking. The rough, chaotic underside of the ice isn't white and sterile, it's stained. Coloured deep golden-brown green, like a vast inverted frozen meadow hanging overhead. This is the ice algae forest. Microscopic diatoms trapped within the ice itself, living in tiny unfrozen brine channels, waiting through the 6-month polar night. When spring returns, and faint light filters through meters of ice, they explode. The entire underside of the Antarctic sea ice becomes a dripping, upside-down garden. This inverted pasture is the true foundation of everything, and grazing upon it is the single most important creature in the entire ocean, the Antarctic krill. Individually, a single krill is nothing, a translucent shrimp no longer than your thumb. Delicate legs modified into a feathery basket, eyes like black pinpoints, a creature so fragile you could crush it between 2 fingers without noticing. But collectively, the Antarctic krill represents perhaps the greatest concentration of animal biomass on Earth. When they swarm, the ocean itself changes colour. Satellite images from space show vast pink stains spreading across hundreds of square miles of southern sea. Not algae, not sediment, living animals. Trillions upon trillions of them moving as one massive biological river. A single superswarm can contain more living tissue than every human being currently alive. More biomass than all the cattle, pigs, and chickens combined. It's a number so vast it stops meaning anything. Your brain simply refuses to process it. They gather beneath the ice ceiling in spring, scraping the inverted algal garden with their basket-like legs. Each individual filters microscopic diatoms, consuming perhaps a few milligrams per day. But multiply that by trillions. Suddenly you're talking about thousands of tons of algae vanishing daily, converted directly into protein-rich crustacean flesh. The krill don't just eat, they process. They concentrate the sun's energy, captured by microscopic plants, into dense packets of fat and protein. They become living fuel cells, portable batteries of calories swimming through the Antarctic Sea. Everything eats them. Fish, seals, penguins diving from above, baleen whales migrating thousands of miles just to reach this pink oceanic feast. The entire Antarctic food web doesn't rest on rock or soil. It rests on these tiny swimming creatures. Without krill, the giants collapse, the seals starve, the penguins abandon their colonies, the whales circle empty water, their massive bodies consuming themselves. Even the deep-sea giants, those patient scavengers of the abyss, depend on the summer krill bloom. Because when whales gorge themselves, some always die. And those whale falls, those colossal gifts from the surface, are ultimately made of krill. The paradox deepens when you realize krill themselves are giants of a sort, not in size but in collective power. They've evolved a strategy that no single large predator can match: overwhelming numerical dominance. A blue whale can consume 4 tons of krill in a single day. Sounds impressive until you remember that's barely a dent in a single medium-sized swarm. The krill simply absorb the loss. For every million consumed, 10 million remain. They reproduce with staggering efficiency. A female can spawn thousands of eggs multiple times per season, but they're not invincible. Their entire life cycle depends on ice, not the permanent glacial ice covering the continent. The seasonal sea ice, that floating frozen ceiling that creates their inverted garden. Krill larvae hatch in spring and immediately swim upward, not toward light exactly, toward structure. They seek the rough underside of the ice, burrowing into its microscopic channels, feeding on the ice algae, sheltering from predators in the crystalline maze. Without ice, larvae drift. Without the ice algae bloom, they starve. Without the protection of that frozen ceiling, they're exposed to every predator in the open water. The ice isn't just habitat, it's nursery, cafeteria, and fortress combined, which makes what's happening now particularly troubling. The Antarctic sea ice is shrinking, not uniformly, not predictably, but measurably. The extent of winter ice coverage has declined significantly in recent decades. Spring breakup arrives earlier. Autumn freezing comes later. For an animal whose entire existence revolves around that ice ceiling, this is catastrophic. Krill populations in certain regions have already crashed. Where there were once dense swarms, now there's open blue water, empty, silent. The ripples spread immediately. Penguin colonies fail to breed. Seal pups die in unusual numbers. Whales arrive to find their anticipated feast diminished or absent entirely. They dive deeper, stay longer, and still come up hungry. This isn't theoretical. Scientists have documented it, stomach contents analysed, population surveys conducted. The data forms an unmistakable pattern. Where ice coverage decreases, krill abundance drops. Where krill vanish, everything else follows. But krill possess one advantage the deep-sea giants lack: speed. Not swimming speed, evolutionary speed. Their life cycle turns over in months, not centuries. They can adapt, potentially, if conditions stabilize. If the ice loss slows, if they're given time. The glass sponges growing for 15,000 years can't adapt. The sleeper sharks living for 500 years can't evolve quickly enough. But krill might. They reproduce fast enough to potentially shift their ranges, alter their behaviors, find new strategies. It's a slim hope, but it exists because krill are not one massive organism. They're trillions of individuals, each one a tiny experiment. Most will fail, but somewhere in that pink oceanic cloud, some might carry mutations that help them survive slightly warmer water, tolerate slightly less ice, feed on slightly different algae. Evolution works through mass death and rare survival. Krill, more than any other Antarctic creature, have the numbers to potentially play that brutal game. Still, watching their swarms thin is watching the foundation crumble. Imagine a vast cathedral built on millions of tiny pillars. Now imagine those pillars dissolving one by one. The structure doesn't collapse immediately. It settles. Cracks form. Sections sag. You can see it weakening even as it still stands. That's the Antarctic ecosystem right now. Still functional. Still supporting life, but visibly straining. The krill themselves seem unaware. They continue their ancient patterns, grazing upside down on the ice ceiling, forming their massive synchronized swarms, reproducing with abandon. They're operating on instincts refined over millions of years. Instincts that assume ice will always return, that winter darkness will always be followed by spring abundance. Those assumptions are being tested. The ice still returns, yes, but less of it, later, thinner. The spring bloom still happens, but briefer, less productive. The krill swarms still form, but smaller, patchier, more fragile. From space, the change might seem minor. A slightly smaller pink stain in the Southern Ocean, a few percentage points of ice coverage lost, numbers on a graph trending downward. But down here, beneath the surface, in the cold blue-green twilight, the change is everything. It's the difference between feast and famine, between a thriving ecosystem and an ecosystem barely holding on. The giants of the deep can survive years without food. They're built for patience, but even patience has limits. Even the slowest metabolism eventually exhausts its reserves. Even the most efficient scavenger needs something to scavenge. And if the krill fail, if their pink swarms thin beyond a critical threshold, then all the other adaptations become meaningless. The abundant oxygen means nothing without food to power metabolism. The slow aging means nothing if starvation comes first. The lack of predators means nothing if the prey base collapses. The Antarctic ecosystem is a perfect machine, elegant, efficient, balanced over millions of years. But every perfect machine has a single point of failure, a keystone component that, if removed, causes total systemic collapse. For the Antarctic giants, that keystone is swimming in vast pink clouds beneath the ice ceiling, tiny, translucent, seemingly insignificant. The krill are not giants by size, but by their collective power, their sheer overwhelming biomass, their position at the foundation of everything. They are perhaps the true giants of the Antarctic, the ones upon which all others depend. Their survival is not guaranteed. The ice that made them is melting. The ceiling that sheltered them is thinning. The garden they graze is shrinking. And because they are the foundation, their struggle becomes everyone's struggle. This is the hidden crisis of the Antarctic, not the loss of individual species. The potential collapse of the entire system's foundation. The keystone crumbling while the cathedral still stands. For now, the swarms still form. The pink clouds still materialize each spring. The whales still come. The seals still hunt. The deep-sea giants still wait patiently for the feast to trickle down to them. But every year, the wait grows longer. The feast grows smaller. The future grows more uncertain. The Antarctic krill are giants built from trillions of tiny lives. And like all giants in this cold kingdom, they exist in a balance so precise that even small changes ripple outward with devastating force. Those pink clouds, those vast swarms, are not invincible. They are survivors, yes, adapted over millions of years to thrive in the harshest conditions imaginable. But they are also specialists, creatures so perfectly tuned to one specific environment that any change to that environment becomes catastrophic. Think about their life cycle. It's a marvel of timing. The krill are synchronized to the ice. Their eggs sink during winter, resting in the deep cold darkness. When spring arrives and the ice algae bloom begins, the larvae rise. They feed on that exact bloom. That precise explosion of food at that exact moment. The timing isn't flexible, it's locked. Now imagine that bloom arriving 2 weeks later than usual, or ending 2 weeks earlier. The larvae rise to find nothing. They starve. Not dramatically, just quietly. A generation thinned by a few percentage points. Then another. Then another. Small changes compound. The ice forms later each year, just by days at first. The krill that depend on that ice ceiling as nursery habitat find less space. Fewer safe zones. More exposure to predators during their vulnerable early stages. The bloom itself becomes unpredictable. Some years robust, other years weak. The krill cannot adapt quickly. Their life cycle, refined over millions of years, assumes consistency. Assumes the ice will behave as it always has. That assumption is breaking down. Scientists monitoring krill populations have noticed something unsettling. The swarms are not disappearing entirely, not yet, but they're shifting, moving southward, retreating toward the last remaining stable ice, concentrating in smaller areas. The total biomass might look similar on paper, but the distribution has changed. What does this mean for the giants who depend on them? For the baleen whales, it means longer journeys, more energy spent searching. The blue whales that migrate thousands of miles for this feast are gambling. They're betting their entire reproductive cycle on finding enough krill in a short enough window to build the blubber reserves they need. If the swarms are patchy, Scattered, unpredictable, the whales burn more calories searching than they gain from feeding. The math stops working. A whale that fails to gain sufficient weight cannot successfully nurse a calf. The calf starves. The lineage weakens. For the penguins and seals, creatures tied to specific breeding colonies on the ice and coast, the problem is even more acute. They cannot simply migrate elsewhere. Their breeding sites are fixed. If the krill move, the parents must swim farther from the nest to feed. Longer journeys mean more energy spent, less food brought back, chicks that grow more slowly, survival rates that drop incrementally year after year. The deep-sea giants face a different crisis. They are built for patience, for waiting. But even patience has limits. If the summer feast diminishes, if the rain of marine snow from above becomes a trickle, then the slow-burning metabolic engines begin to fail. An isopod can survive years without food, but not decades. A sleeper shark can drift for centuries, but only if occasional whale falls still arrive. If the surface ecosystem collapses, if fewer whales survive to eventually die and sink, then the deep becomes a true desert. The Antarctic ecosystem is not a collection of independent species. It's a web, a tightly woven network where every strand depends on every other. Pull one thread and the entire structure trembles. The krill are that central thread, and the ice is what holds the krill. So when we talk about Antarctic ice loss, we're not just talking about melting glaciers or rising sea levels. We're talking about the dismantling of an entire biological architecture, a system that took 30 million years to build, being undone in less than a century. The ice shelves are retreating, not slowly, rapidly. Ice that was permanent for millennia is now seasonal. Ice that was thick is now thin. The winter freeze that once spread like a blanket now arrives late and departs early. Each lost week of ice coverage is a week less feeding time for the algae. Less bloom, less krill, less food for everything above. The Antarctic is not warming uniformly. Some areas are heating faster than others. This creates patchwork conditions, zones where the old rhythm still holds, other zones where it has already collapsed. The krill cannot simply move to the good zones. They are not that flexible. They are tied to currents, to temperature gradients, to ice formations that are themselves disappearing. What happens when the nursery habitat vanishes entirely? Scientists have run the models. The projections are not comforting. Under current warming trends, the Antarctic sea ice could experience regular summer ice-free conditions within decades. Not centuries, decades. Ice-free does not mean the ice disappears completely. It means the seasonal ice fails to form with the same consistency, thickness, and duration. It means the ceiling that the krill depend on becomes unreliable, sporadic, insufficient. When that happens, the krill population does not crash overnight. It erodes, generation by generation, season by season. The swarms grow thinner, the pink clouds less vibrant, the whales find less food, the penguins swim farther, the deep-sea giants wait longer between meals. The system does not collapse with a bang. It fades, slowly, quietly, the way a candle burns down. And the king crabs, those armoured invaders, are not the only new threat. Warming water brings others. Fish species that could never survive the Antarctic cold are now probing southward, testing the boundaries, finding the water just warm enough to tolerate. These invaders bring competition. They eat the same krill. They hunt the same prey. They occupy the same niches. But they are faster, more aggressive, more adapted to changeable conditions. The Antarctic giants are not. They are specialists, slow, patient, perfectly tuned to a stable environment. When that environment becomes unstable, their perfection becomes a liability. Evolution favoured them for millions of years because the Antarctic was predictable. Cold, dark, isolated. Those conditions rewarded slowness, efficiency, longevity. Those same traits now make them vulnerable. A fast-growing fish can adapt to changing conditions within a few generations. A krill species with a 1-year life cycle can evolve relatively quickly. But a glass sponge that takes 10,000 years to grow? A sleeper shark that lives 500 years? A sea spider with a century-long lifespan? They cannot adapt, not quickly enough. The timescale of climate change is measured in decades. The timescale of Antarctic giant evolution is measured in millennia. There is no overlap, no mechanism for rapid adjustment. This is the quiet tragedy unfolding beneath the ice. Not a dramatic extinction event, not a single catastrophic moment. Just a slow, relentless grinding down of systems that have no defense against change. The Antarctic giants are not dying dramatically. They are simply failing to reproduce successfully, failing to find enough food, failing to compete with newcomers, failing to maintain population numbers. Each year, slightly fewer survive, slightly fewer reproduce. The average age of the population increases as recruitment fails. Old giants remain. Young ones never arrive to replace them. Eventually, the population becomes geriatric, and then it simply fades away. The glass sponge forests will not be shattered in a single season, but year by year, as crabs bulldoze through them and no new sponges grow to replace the damaged ones, the forests will thin. Open patches will appear, then clearings, then scattered remnants. The sea spiders will not vanish overnight, but as their prey disappears and their habitat changes, they will become rarer, patchier, confined to smaller refuges. The isopods will persist longest, perhaps. They are tough, armoured, patient. But even they need food. Even they need whalefalls. And if the whales stop coming, if the surface ecosystem collapses, then even the isopods will slowly starve. This is not speculation. This is observation. Scientists are already documenting these changes. Population declines, range contractions, shifts in species composition. The data is accumulating. The Antarctic is changing. Not might change. Is changing. Right now. While we speak, the giants are still there. The swarms still form. The ice still freezes. But the margins are narrowing. The buffer is shrinking. The resilience is eroding. How much change can the system absorb before it tips? Before the krill populations drop below the threshold needed to support the whales? Before the whales stop migrating south because the journey is no longer worth the energy cost? No one knows exactly where that threshold lies, but we are testing it, actively, relentlessly. The Antarctic ecosystem is not fragile in the sense of being delicate. It has survived for 30 million years. It has weathered ice ages and warm periods. But those changes unfolded over geological time. Thousands of years. Tens of thousands. This change is happening in decades. A blink. A heartbeat. Faster than any ecosystem can adapt. The fortress is not being stormed. It is being undermined. The walls are not falling. They are dissolving, slowly, quietly. The defenders are still at their posts, but their numbers are thinning. And the invaders are patient. The king crabs will not conquer the Antarctic in a season, but they do not need to. They just need to keep moving south, keep eating, keep reproducing, year after year, while the giants grow older and fewer. This is the true crisis. Not dramatic, not sudden, just inexorable. A slow-motion unraveling of a perfect system, a kingdom built on cold and ice and time, watching its foundations melt. Yet this isn't a conquest, it's a replacement. The crabs don't sweep through like an army. They migrate, slowly, methodically, generation by generation, creeping across the continental shelf, establishing themselves in patches, first dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Each successful colonist produces offspring better adapted to the cold than their parents. Evolution on fast forward. Within a few crab generations, perhaps 50 human years, Entire regions of the Antarctic shelf could host permanent populations. And once established, they won't leave. They'll breed, they'll spread, they'll do what evolution designed them to do: hunt, crush, consume. The Antarctic giants have no behavioral defenses against this, no instinct to flee from crushing claws. They've never needed one. For 30 million years, slowness was safe, vulnerability was tolerable. The ecosystem rewarded patience, not armor. But that ancient contract is breaking. The new rules favor speed, aggression, the ability to crack shells and tear flesh, everything the Antarctic giants are not. Scientists watching this unfold describe it in clinical terms: range expansion, invasive species dynamics, ecosystem restructuring. But beneath the jargon lies something starker. They're witnessing the death of a world, not through meteor strike or volcanic eruption, through temperature, through the simple, relentless warming of water by 1 or 2 degrees. The crabs are just messengers, symptoms of a larger transformation. The real invader is heat, and heat brings everything with it. Warmer water holds less oxygen. The very foundation of Antarctic gigantism, that hyperoxidized water, begins to weaken. The metabolic advantage shrinks. Breathing becomes harder. Bodies that once thrived in oxygen-rich cold now struggle in oxygen-poor warmth. It's suffocation in slow motion. The ice itself is changing. The sea ice forms later each autumn, melts earlier each spring. The algae forests beneath have less time to establish. The blooms arrive later, end sooner. The krill swarms, dependent on that ice algae nursery, begin to thin, not vanish, just thin. A little less biomass each year. A slightly smaller pink cloud in the summer sea. And when the krill falter, everything above them shakes. The fish that eat krill find less food. The seals that eat those fish hunt longer. The whales that migrate thousands of miles arrive to find the banquet smaller than memory promised. Some years, they turn back early. Some years, they don't come at all. The energy budget that sustained this system for millennia is being rewritten, not erased, just made leaner, tighter, less forgiving of inefficiency. The giants, those slow-growing, long-lived, patient accumulators of time, are the first casualties of this new math. They cannot speed up. They cannot change their metabolic programming. They are locked into a strategy that requires abundance, time, and cold. When those conditions shift, even slightly, the strategy fails. A giant isopod that could once survive 5 years between whalefalls now needs to find food every 3. But whalefalls aren't more frequent. They're less so. The isopod starves, not dramatically, just gradually. Its fat reserves deplete. Its reproduction fails. It grows old without producing young. A sea spider that once lived 80 years now faces predation at 30. It dies with its genetic line unfinished. The glass sponge that began growing when humans first built pyramids is shattered by a crab that evolved resistance to cold in the span of a human lifetime. This is not balance. This is replacement. One system for another. The old Antarctic, the kingdom of the slow and ancient, giving way to something faster, more competitive, more recognizable, more like every other ocean on Earth. And perhaps that's the deepest tragedy. Not that the Antarctic ecosystem will die completely. It won't. Life is resilient, but it will stop being unique. It will stop being a refuge. It will become just another cold ocean. Colder than most, yes, but no longer alien, no longer operating by different rules. The giants will shrink back into memory, replaced by creatures that could live anywhere. We're not just losing species, we're losing a biological philosophy, a proof that life can take radically different paths, that cold doesn't mean small, that slow doesn't mean simple, that ancient doesn't mean inferior. The Antarctic giants demonstrated something profound about evolution's creativity. They showed that given the right conditions, given time and isolation, life will explore possibilities we can barely imagine. They proved that our familiar rules, our mammalian assumptions about what works and what doesn't, are just one solution among infinite possibilities. When they disappear, we lose more than biodiversity. We lose a window into alternative ways of being. A reminder that our own hot, fast, aggressive strategy isn't the only successful one. That patience, when paired with the right environment, builds cathedrals. That slowness, when protected, achieves impossible size. But protection is failing. The fortress walls are dissolving. And the inhabitants, evolved for 30 million years in safety, have no weapons against the world rushing in. They face their transformation not with resistance, but with silence. The same profound silence that defined their existence. They simply continue, growing slowly, living quietly, unaware that their time is measured now, not in geological ages, but in human decades. Some will persist longer than others. Refuges will remain, deep pockets where the water stays cold enough, where crabs haven't yet penetrated, where the old rules still apply. These will become museums, living fossils of an ecosystem that once stretched across an entire ocean. Tourists will visit them eventually. Submarines will descend to glimpse the last glass forests, the final giant sea spiders. And perhaps that's our role in this story. Witnesses, recorders. We arrived just in time to document what the Antarctic was before we changed it, before our atmosphere warmed the water, before our industrial revolution unlocked the gates. We're watching the end of a world we barely understood, recording its creatures before they vanish into extinction, or worse, ordinariness. Because that's the strange fate awaiting some Antarctic species. Not extinction, but normalization. As the Southern Ocean warms, it won't just host invaders, it will transform its natives. The survivors will be those that can adapt, grow faster, compete harder, become less giant, more typical. Evolution will reshape them into something fit for the new Antarctic, something smaller, quicker, less extraordinary. And future generations will look at old footage of dinner plate sea spiders and football-sized isopods the way we look at photos of mammoths. Impressive, implausible, impossible to fully believe. They'll wonder how such creatures ever existed. They'll study the unique conditions that created them, the cold, the oxygen, the isolation, and they'll realize, perhaps with sadness, that those conditions are gone. That we lived through the brief window when both ancient Antarctica and modern humanity coexisted. We're standing at a threshold. The Antarctic giants are still there. The ice still freezes. The krill still swarm. But the margins are closing. The trajectory is clear. Unless something fundamental changes, unless the warming stops or reverses, this ecosystem will transform within our lifetimes. Not vanish, transform, become something else, something lesser. That's the weight we carry. The knowledge that we're watching something irreplaceable slip away. Not through malice, not through intention, just through the accumulated consequence of burning fossil fuels, of building industries, of living the way we've chosen to live. The Antarctic giants are paying the price for choices made thousands of miles away by creatures they'll never meet. And they cannot protest, cannot adapt fast enough, cannot migrate to colder water because there is no colder water. The Antarctic is the bottom, the final refuge. When it warms, there's nowhere left to go. The giants face their fate with the same quiet patience they've always shown, growing slowly, living long, waiting for food, unaware that waiting, their greatest strength, has become their fatal weakness in a world that no longer rewards patience. Yet their waiting has been shaped by a clock we cannot fully grasp. The crabs aren't invading, they're returning. 3 million years ago, before the Antarctic froze into its current state, before the circumpolar current became an impenetrable moat, these creatures or their ancestors lived here. The Ice Age expelled them. The warming invites them back. This isn't colonization, it's homecoming. The irony cuts deep. We label this invasion, destruction, catastrophe. But from another perspective, from deep time's view, this is simply correction. The Antarctic's 30 million year isolation was the anomaly, a geological accident, a temporary fortress created by continental drift and ocean currents. Now those conditions are reversing. The crabs aren't invaders, they're the original inhabitants reclaiming lost territory. This doesn't make their arrival less devastating. The giants evolved for a world that no longer exists. They adapted perfectly to conditions that are dissolving. Their entire strategy, slowness, efficiency, minimal metabolism, depends on cold stability and predator absence. Remove either variable and the equation collapses. The king crabs represent both variables simultaneously. They bring warmth, tolerating higher temperatures than the native fauna. And they bring predation, crushing force the ecosystem hasn't faced in epochs. It's a double assault, environmental change paired with biological invasion. The giants cannot adapt fast enough because adaptation for them occurs across centuries. They grow slowly, reproduce slowly, evolve slowly. The crabs move on human timescales. Decades, not millennia. By the time a giant isopod reaches reproductive maturity, the crabs will have already colonized its habitat, consumed its food sources, shattered its refuges. The race is already lost before it begins. Scientists tracking this invasion describe it with clinical language: range expansion, thermal tolerance, trophic cascade. But beneath the terminology lies something almost tragic. We're watching evolution in reverse. Complexity giving way to simplicity. Ancient lineages yielding to modern ones. The Paleozoic garden being paved over by the Cenozoic parking lot. Some researchers propose intervention. Barriers, culling programs, artificial cooling. But the scale defeats imagination. The Antarctic continental shelf spans millions of square kilometers. The crabs are already established in multiple locations, and the warming, the fundamental driver, continues unabated. You cannot fence the ocean. You cannot reverse climate change with crab traps. The momentum is geological. Others suggest acceptance. Document what exists now. Catalogue the giants before they vanish. Build genetic libraries. Preserve specimens. Create records for future generations who will never see these sea creatures alive. Turn science into archaeology before the subjects are even dead. It's preservation through surrender. Both approaches miss something fundamental. The giants aren't asking for our help. They don't know help exists. They continue their ancient rhythms, unaware that those rhythms are now out of sync with their environment. The glass sponges keep filtering. The sea spiders keep hunting. The isopods keep scavenging. They persist because persistence is all they know. What strikes hardest isn't the invasion itself, but the silence surrounding it. This transformation happens in darkness, kilometers beneath ice, witnessed by virtually no one. Unlike coral bleaching or rainforest burning, it offers no dramatic visuals, no charismatic megafauna, no viral imagery. Just slow extinction in the cold and dark. The world above continues oblivious while the world below unravels. We might imagine future expeditions. Submarines descending into waters now dominated by crabs. Where glass forests once stood, rubble fields. Where sea spiders stalked, empty mud. Where isopods gathered at whale falls, only crabs feasting. The ecosystem simplified, streamlined, made ordinary. The researchers would note this in their logs. Former habitat of Colosyndaeus. Historical range of Glyptonotus. They'd speak in past tense about creatures that once required geological time to grow. And perhaps they'd wonder what it was like, that brief window when both ancient Antarctic and modern humanity coexisted, when the fortress still stood, when the giants still thrived, when the cold still ruled. The crabs themselves are blameless. They're following temperature gradients, seeking food, reproducing, They're doing exactly what evolution designed them to do, which is survive. They didn't choose this role. We chose it for them by warming their world, by melting the barrier, by opening gates that should have remained closed for another few million years. This is the uncomfortable truth. The invasion is anthropogenic, human-caused. We lit the fuse decades ago with industrial emissions. The explosion is only now reaching the Antarctic sea floor. The crabs are our proxies, our unintentional agents, the blunt instruments of climate change translated into biological reality. And there's no switching it off. Even if emissions cease tomorrow, the ocean holds heat for centuries. The warming already locked in will continue driving crabs southward. The threshold has been crossed. The water temperature that once formed an impenetrable wall is now merely a gradient, and gradients, unlike walls, can be climbed. Some giants will persist longer than others. Deep refuges exist, pockets where the water stays cold enough, where crabs haven't yet penetrated. These will become islands, isolated populations clinging to vanishing habitat. Eventually, even these will fail. But not immediately, not all at once. The ending will be gradual, patchy, a slow fade rather than sudden blackout, which somehow makes it worse. Quick extinction grants clarity, slow extinction grants false hope. The illusion that maybe, somehow, things will stabilize, that adaptation will occur, that the giants will find a way. But the math doesn't support hope. The giants evolved over millions of years for conditions that are disappearing within decades. The timescales are incompatible. Evolutionary speed cannot match climatic velocity. The race is already over. We're just watching the final laps. What will replace them? Probably nothing equivalent. The new Antarctic ecosystem will be poorer, less strange, more familiar, dominated by species we recognize from elsewhere. Crabs, fish, creatures that could live anywhere. The uniqueness will drain away. The Southern Ocean will become just another ocean, colder than most, but no longer alien, no longer a window into deep time. Just water, just life, just ordinary. This represents a peculiar form of loss. Not extinction of species necessarily, though that will occur, but extinction of wonder. The Antarctic giants weren't just organisms. They were proof that life could build kingdoms anywhere, that the rules we consider fundamental, warm-blooded dominance, fast metabolism, red blood, weren't actually rules at all, just local conditions. The giants showed us alternatives, different solutions to the problem of existence, and now those solutions are being erased. Not because they failed, but because we changed the test. The deep Southern Ocean will continue, the ice will keep forming, the darkness will persist. But the magic, that profound biological strangeness born from 30 million years of isolation, will fade into memory, into museum specimens, into old footage played for students who cannot quite believe such creatures ever existed. They'll seem impossible. Dinner plate sea spiders with organs in their legs, football-sized isopods waiting years between meals, fish with no blood, sponges older than civilization. The students will ask if we're sure these were real, and we'll show them the preserved specimens, the photographs, the genetic sequences, and we'll say, yes, they were real. They lived in a world so cold and dark and strange that evolution invented solutions we're still trying to understand. They were the last representatives of an ancient ecosystem, and we watched them vanish, not through malice, not through intention, just through the accumulated consequence of living the way we chose to live. The giants are paying the price for our comfort, our convenience, our refusal to change quickly enough. They cannot protest, cannot adapt, cannot survive what's coming. They can only continue, growing slowly, living long, waiting patiently. Unaware that waiting, their greatest evolutionary achievement, has become their fatal vulnerability in a world that no longer rewards patience. Yet waiting has become vulnerability. In a world accelerating beyond recognition, the giants' greatest evolutionary strength transforms into fatal weakness. Their patience, refined over geological epochs, now encounters a force operating on timescales measured not in millennia, but in decades. The climate doesn't negotiate. It doesn't pause for adaptation. It simply changes, indifferent to the consequences rippling through ecosystems, unprepared for such velocity. Consider what this means in practical terms. A giant glass sponge begins its life during the Bronze Age. It grows through the rise and fall of Rome, through medieval plagues, through industrial revolutions. It survives because nothing in its environment changes faster than its ability to respond. Its strategy works because the Antarctic remains Antarctic. Cold, stable, protected. But now, the fundamental assumption underlying 30 million years of evolution is breaking. The fortress is compromised not by invasion alone, but by transformation of the fortress itself. The Antarctic Ocean is warming, not everywhere equally, not dramatically everywhere, but enough. The temperature barrier that kept modern predators at bay, that invisible thermal wall, is developing cracks. These cracks appear first at depth, along continental slopes where slightly warmer water from the north can penetrate, in submarine canyons where currents shift. The king crabs don't storm the gates. They seep through weak points. Individuals first, then populations. Testing, probing, finding the places where the barrier has thinned just enough to permit passage. And once inside, they encounter paradise. A buffet 30 million years in preparation. Slow prey with no defenses against crushing. Glass structures that shatter on contact. Soft bodies encased in armor evolved to resist grasping, not pulverizing. The crabs don't need to be particularly clever. They simply need to be there, applying hydraulic force that nothing in this ecosystem can withstand. The ecological mathematics are brutal. One king crab can consume multiple giant isopods. It grows, it reproduces, its offspring spread. Each generation pushes deeper into previously untouched territory. The invasion front advances not in years, but in meters per year. Slow by human standards. Catastrophically fast by Antarctic standards. Scientists tracking this invasion find evidence in sediment cores, in video surveys, in stomach contents. The crabs are eating the past, consuming organisms that represent evolutionary lineages older than most terrestrial life forms. Each crushed shell, each shattered sponge, represents the permanent erasure of something irreplaceable, not just individual organisms, but entire adaptive strategies, ways of being that worked for epochs, but cannot work in the new Antarctic. The tragedy deepens when you understand what's being lost isn't just size, it's time itself. These creatures are living archives. Their bodies contain chemical records of ocean conditions across centuries. Their slow growth rings, like trees, preserve history. When a 5,000-year-old sponge is destroyed, we lose not just a sponge, but a library, an unread chronicle of climate, of ocean chemistry, of biological patterns stretching back before written human history. And the loss cascades. The glass sponges create habitat. Their intricate structures shelter smaller organisms, brittle stars, amphipods, tiny fish. When the sponges fall, these communities collapse. The seafloor flattens. Diversity plummets. What was once a three-dimensional forest of glass becomes a plain of mud and broken shards. The crabs thrive in this simplified landscape. They prefer it. They create it. This pattern, this transformation from complex to simple, from ancient to modern, is accelerating. Temperature projections suggest the barrier will continue weakening. More thermal corridors will open. More crab populations will establish. The invasion will become an occupation. And the giants, those magnificent products of cold and time, will retreat into ever-shrinking refugees. Some will survive in the deepest, coldest pockets, places where the water remains just cold enough to exclude crabs. These will become islands, isolated populations separated by inhospitable seas, now filled with predators. Gene flow will cease. Populations will diverge or dwindle. The slow attrition of fragmentation will complete what the crabs began. Biologists studying this transformation struggle with a peculiar grief. They're witnessing not extinction in the traditional sense, but replacement. The Antarctic ecosystem isn't dying. It's being normalized, converted into something recognizable, something that resembles temperate oceans elsewhere. The strangeness is being averaged away. This normalization represents a philosophical loss as much as biological. The Antarctic giants proved that life's possibilities are broader than we imagined. That evolution can solve problems in ways we'd never consider. That size, slowness, and patience can be winning strategies under the right conditions. Their disappearance narrows the universe of biological possibility, makes life seem more predictable, less inventive. It also raises uncomfortable questions about inevitability. If we can't protect an ecosystem this remote, this vast, this seemingly beyond human influence, what can we protect? The Antarctic should be the easiest place to preserve. Minimal human presence, international treaties, scientific interest. And yet the warming we've triggered reaches even here, reshaping biology at the bottom of the world. The giants cannot petition for protection. They cannot adapt faster. They cannot relocate. They simply exist, as they have for millions of years, following strategies that worked perfectly until the rules changed. Their evolutionary bet on stability, on unchanging cold, on isolation is being called, and they're losing. Some scientists propose intervention, physically removing crabs, creating artificial barriers, cooling specific regions. These suggestions reveal desperation. The scale is impossible. The Antarctic coastline stretches thousands of kilometers. The crabs are already established in multiple locations. The warming is global. You cannot protect an ocean with fences or spot cooling. Others suggest documentation. Record everything. Preserve specimens. Sequence genomes. Create a biological inventory before it vanishes. This is valuable but melancholy work. Cataloguing extinction. Creating museums of the recently lost. It acknowledges that preservation in place is failing. That future generations will know these creatures only through preserved tissues and video archives. The invasion also complicates our understanding of natural. Is this natural? The crabs are responding to environmental conditions. They're not invasive in the traditional sense. They're native to southern oceans. They're simply expanding their range as barriers fall. If humans caused the warming that dropped the barriers, is the resulting ecological transformation natural or artificial? Does the distinction even matter? These philosophical tangles don't interest the isopods or the sponges. They simply experience the consequences. A crab appears where no crab has been for 30 million years. It encounters an organism with no appropriate fear response. The organism dies. The process repeats. Ecology doesn't care about intentions or classifications. It responds to physics and chemistry. And currently, physics and chemistry are rewriting the rules. The speed of this rewriting is what makes it particularly cruel. If the warming occurred over hundreds of thousands of years, evolution might respond. Defenses might develop. Behavioral changes might emerge. But decades? That's too fast. Evolution operates on generation time. For creatures that live centuries, that reproduce slowly, that grow imperceptibly, decades are nothing, a blink, insufficient time for meaningful adaptation. So they continue. The sea spiders still hunt with their slow, deliberate grace. The isopods still wait patiently for the next whale fall. The sponges still filter water, accumulating millimeters of growth per decade. They persist in their ancient patterns, because those patterns are all they know, all they can do. Their biology doesn't permit rapid response, cannot permit it. The metabolic lock that granted them centuries of life now prevents the behavioral flexibility that might save them. This is what makes their situation so profoundly sad. They're not failing. They're succeeding at strategies that no longer work. They're doing exactly what evolution optimized them to do. Being patient, growing slowly, living long. These were winning strategies for 30 million years. The fact that they're suddenly losing strategies doesn't reflect any failure on their part. It reflects the breaking of the world they were built for. And that world is breaking faster now. Temperature records show acceleration. Ice shelves collapse, glaciers retreat. The Southern Ocean warms, not uniformly, not everywhere, but enough. The thermal gradients shift. The fortress walls thin, and behind those walls, the giants wait, patient as always, unaware that patience itself has become the problem, that their greatest virtue is now their fatal flaw in a world that no longer rewards waiting. Yet beneath this philosophical debate lies a simpler, more immediate reality. The warming continues. The crabs advance, and the giants, magnificent in their slowness, cannot adapt fast enough to matter. Research stations track the invasion front. Scientists map crab populations, moving steadily southward and inward, colonizing new seafloor with each passing year. Models predict where they'll be in a decade, 2 decades. The projections are not encouraging. In some areas, the transformation has already begun. Dive surveys that once revealed glass sponge forests now show scattered fragments. Isopod populations decline. Sea spider densities drop. The ecosystem doesn't collapse dramatically. It simply becomes different, quieter, less strange, more ordinary. Some species might persist in isolated pockets. Deep refugia where the water stays cold enough. Small sanctuaries where the ancient rules still apply. But these would be islands, remnants. The vast, interconnected kingdom we've explored tonight would fragment into disconnected pieces, each one vulnerable to the next warming pulse, the next shift in current, the next wave of crabs. The irony is brutal. The very isolation that protected these giants for 30 million years now makes them especially vulnerable. They evolved no defenses because they needed none. Their strategies, their armor, their entire way of being was optimized for a world without modern predators, a world that no longer exists. And there's no evolutionary escape hatch, no rapid adaptation waiting in their genes. The isopods cannot suddenly develop thicker shells. The sea spiders cannot learn to move faster. The sponges cannot relocate. Their biology is locked in patterns set millions of years ago, when the ocean was colder and the fortress was secure. This is extinction without drama, no asteroid impact, no volcanic eruption, just a slow warming, a gradual breach, and the quiet disappearance of creatures so specialized, so perfectly adapted to their unique environment that they cannot exist anywhere else. The Antarctic giants are not just rare, they are irreplaceable. When they vanish, nothing similar will evolve to replace them. The conditions that created them may never exist again. Some argue we should intervene more aggressively. Establish marine protected areas, restrict fishing, limit tourism. These measures help, certainly, but they address symptoms, not causes. The fundamental problem isn't overfishing or pollution, it's temperature, and temperature is controlled by global atmospheric carbon, by industrial emissions, by decisions made in boardrooms and capitals thousands of miles from any iceberg. The fate of the Antarctic giants is being decided not in research stations or conservation meetings, but in energy policy, transportation choices, industrial practices. The connection is indirect but absolute. Every ton of carbon added to the atmosphere eventually translates to heat in the ocean. And that heat, reaching the Antarctic, becomes a death sentence, written in fractions of a degree. This creates a strange temporal disconnect. The decisions being made now won't fully manifest for decades. The crabs advancing today are responding to warming that began years ago. The ecosystem we're losing is being destroyed by emissions already in the atmosphere, decisions already made. Even if emissions stopped tomorrow, the warming already underway would continue. The crabs would keep advancing. The giants would keep retreating. There's a particular sadness in watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Fast catastrophes at least offer the possibility of dramatic intervention. But this requires sustained global cooperation on climate policy. It requires changing economic systems, energy infrastructure, agricultural practices. It requires humanity to act collectively against a threat that manifests gradually, invisibly, in waters most people will never see. The Antarctic giants ask nothing of us. They make no emotional appeals. They simply exist, doing what they've always done, in the only way they know how. Their survival depends entirely on whether we choose to preserve the conditions that allow them to be. And currently, we're choosing not to, not actively, not deliberately, but through inaction and delay that amounts to the same thing. Some scientists speak hopefully of tipping points, moments when public awareness crystallizes, when political will suddenly manifests, when the necessary changes become possible. Perhaps the Antarctic giants will be that catalyst. Perhaps their strangeness, their beauty, their profound adaptation will capture enough attention to matter. Perhaps. But perhaps is not a survival strategy. The crabs don't wait for human epiphanies. They simply move forward, following the warming water, doing what evolution programmed them to do. They're not villains. They're just crabs, exploiting a new opportunity, expanding their range as barriers fall. If roles were reversed, if the Antarctic suddenly cooled and the giants could invade temperate waters, they would do the same. This is how ecology works. Species spread when conditions allow. Competition eliminates the unprepared. The difference is that humans created these conditions, not intentionally, not maliciously. But the warming opening the fortress gates traces directly back to human activity. We burned the fossil fuels. We released the carbon. We changed the atmospheric composition. And now, in waters we rarely think about, creatures we barely know are paying the price for decisions made by people who never considered them. There's something uniquely tragic about destroying what we've only just discovered. The first colossal squid specimen wasn't examined until 2007. Most glass sponge forests remain unmapped. We're still describing new species of Antarctic invertebrates. We've barely begun to understand this ecosystem, and we're already watching it transform into something else. Future generations may know the Antarctic giants only through preserved specimens, genetic sequences, video archives, museum pieces from a vanished world, unless something changes, unless the warming slows, unless we find ways to protect these deep, cold refugia long enough for climate policy to catch up with climate reality. The window is closing, but it hasn't shut completely. The fortress walls are breached but not demolished. Some giants remain. Some glass forests still stand. Some isopods still patrol the abyss, patient as ever, waiting for the next whale fall. Their fate is genuinely uncertain, not predetermined, not inevitable, contingent on decisions humans haven't made yet, policies we haven't implemented, technologies we haven't deployed. The story could still end differently than it's currently heading, but that requires recognizing what's at stake. Not just biodiversity in abstract, not just ecosystem services or carbon sequestration or any other utilitarian justification. Something else. Something harder to quantify, but equally important. The Antarctic giants represent a different possibility, a different way of being alive. They show us that the hot, fast, competitive world we know is not the only option, that evolution can build magnificent complexity from cold, from slowness, from patience. That life doesn't have to be a frantic race. It can be a centuries-long meditation, a glacial accumulation of experience, a quiet persistence that outlasts empires. Losing them means losing that possibility, losing proof that other strategies work. losing living examples of alternatives to the growth at all costs mentality that dominates our own species. The Antarctic giants are not just organisms, they're counter-arguments, living refutations of assumptions we didn't know we were making, and they're vanishing while we debate what to do. While we commission studies and hold conferences and promise action next year, next decade, eventually, the crabs don't wait for consensus. The warming doesn't pause for political convenience. The invasion continues, methodical and relentless, rewriting 30 million years of evolutionary history, one crushed shell at a time. Perhaps that's the final lesson. That nature doesn't care about our timelines, our economic concerns, our political difficulties. It simply responds to physical conditions. Change the temperature, change the ecosystem. The rest follows with mathematical certainty. The giants cannot vote, cannot protest, cannot make their case in any language we understand. They can only be what they are, in the only place they can be. And if that place disappears, they disappear with it. The silence that would follow their extinction would be absolute, not the profound silence of the abyss, filled with slow life and ancient rhythms, but true silence, the silence of absence, of something that was and now isn't, of possibilities closed, strategies ended, wonder erased. That silence approaches, not tomorrow, not next year, but approaching nonetheless, steady as a crab climbing a continental slope, patient as the warming that drives it. Yet that silence we've been speaking of, the one that settles when crabs move and glaciers melt, isn't quite complete. Because there's another sound beginning to surface from these deep waters, faint but growing louder. The sound of scientists scrambling to document what remains. Research vessels pushing farther south during brief summer windows. Submersibles descending into territories we've barely touched. Racing to catalogue species we're only now discovering exist. Every expedition returns with something unexpected. A sponge formation scientists swear couldn't be that old until carbon dating confirms it predates written language. An isopod specimen carrying parasites nobody's seen before, suggesting entire micro-ecosystems living within the giants themselves. Video footage of sleeper sharks moving through glass forests with a grace that contradicts everything their bulk suggests they should be capable of. The urgency isn't subtle anymore. Deep-sea biologists speak in timeframes that sound almost apocalyptic. 10 years before the crab populations establish permanent colonies. 20 before certain isopod populations collapse beyond recovery. 50 before the glass forests, those 15,000-year-old monuments, crumble into sand under the methodical feeding patterns of modern predators. These aren't predictions designed to alarm. They're extrapolations based on invasion rates already observed, temperature changes already measured, ecosystem shifts already documented in real time. Some scientists are attempting interventions, experimental barriers to slow crab migration routes, artificial cold water refugia where vulnerable species might survive even as surrounding temperatures climb, gene banking projects collecting tissue samples from as many Antarctic organisms as possible, preserving their genetic information for futures we can't predict. None of these efforts guarantee success. Most acknowledge they're buying time rather than solving problems, creating breathing room for policy changes that may never materialize. Others argue documentation itself is the intervention that matters most. Every new species described, every behavior filmed, every ecological relationship mapped becomes ammunition in larger battles about climate policy, marine protection, international cooperation. You can't protect what you don't know exists. You can't mourn what was never named. So they descend, they document, they publish papers, describing creatures most people will never see, ecosystems functioning in ways most won't comprehend, creating a record so future generations might understand what their oceans once contained. The irony cuts both ways. The same technological advancement that lets us finally explore these depths high-definition cameras that function under crushing pressure, robotics that navigate total darkness, genetic sequencing that reveals hidden diversity, is powered by the same industrial infrastructure, driving the warming that threatens everything we're discovering. We're simultaneously unveiling and destroying the Antarctic abyss, learning its secrets while erasing the conditions that created them. Understanding arrives hand in hand with loss. And what about those giants themselves, the slow-living, cold-adapted organisms we've spent this journey meeting? They're not aware of climate graphs or international treaties. A glass sponge filtering nutrients from frigid currents doesn't comprehend that the water temperature has shifted by fractions of a degree. An isopod, waiting patiently for the next whalefall, can't perceive that crab populations are advancing up the continental slope. These creatures simply continue existing as they have for millions of years, following strategies that worked perfectly until they suddenly didn't. Their resilience has limits we're only beginning to map. Some Antarctic organisms can tolerate slight temperature increases, metabolic flexibility nobody expected from creatures so specialized. Others collapse immediately, their physiological tolerances so narrow that even minimal change proves catastrophic. The survivors won't be the largest or most spectacular. They'll be whatever organisms happen to possess the right combination of adaptability and luck. The ecological lottery that determines every mass extinction's aftermath. Because that's what we're potentially witnessing. Not something as dramatic as an asteroid impact or volcanic catastrophe, but a slow-motion mass extinction event where the defining characteristic is patience. The crabs move gradually. The water warms incrementally. The giants die one by one rather than all at once, their populations thinning across decades until someone realizes entire species haven't been observed in years. This kind of extinction doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispers, fades, and only becomes undeniable in hindsight. The Antarctic isn't unique in facing these pressures. Similar stories unfold across every ocean basin, every ecosystem experiencing rapid change. Coral reefs bleaching, kelp forests collapsing, deep-sea hydrothermal vent communities disrupted by mining interests. But the Antarctic holds particular significance because it represents something we thought was protected by sheer remoteness, by cold so profound it formed a natural fortress. If climate change can penetrate here, breach the thermal walls that guarded this ecosystem for 30 million years, then nowhere is truly safe. No refuge is permanent. That realization should terrify us more than it seems to. We've treated the deep ocean as infinite, mysterious, essentially unchangeable, despite our surface-level interference. The Antarctic giants prove that assumption wrong. They show us that even the most alien, most isolated, most seemingly indestructible ecosystems are fragile when conditions shift. Their slow metabolisms, their geological lifespans, their patient accumulation of size across centuries, all these strategies that made them successful in stable cold water become vulnerabilities when stability disappears. What happens to a creature designed to live 500 years when its habitat becomes uninhabitable in 50? What happens to a sponge that's been growing for 15,000 years when predators it never evolved to resist suddenly arrive? These questions don't have happy answers. They have endings. Some quick, some prolonged, none particularly dignified for organisms that survived ice ages and planetary climate shifts that would have obliterated less adapted species. Yet even in this grim accounting, there's something worth preserving beyond the organisms themselves. The Antarctic giants represent proof that life finds solutions we'd never imagine, that evolution produces answers to questions we haven't learned to ask. They demonstrate that success isn't always about speed, aggression, competition in the ways we typically understand. Sometimes it's about patience, about efficiency, about finding a niche so specific, so extreme, that you become the only organism capable of existing there. Losing them means losing those lessons. Losing living examples of alternative strategies, different approaches to the fundamental challenge of staying alive. The Antarctic ecosystem isn't just a collection of bizarre organisms. It's a library of biological solutions, each species a different answer to the question of how to thrive in impossible conditions. When species go extinct, we don't just lose organisms, we lose knowledge, approaches, possibilities we didn't know existed until they're gone. And perhaps most importantly, we lose humility. The Antarctic giants remind us that human timescales, human priorities, human ways of understanding the world aren't universal. A glass sponge living for 15,000 years operates on timeframes we can barely conceptualize. A sleeper shark born before Columbus sailed to America is still young by its species standards. These organisms force us to think beyond our own brief lifespans, to consider continuities that stretch across millennia rather than decades. Their potential extinction represents a failure of imagination as much as policy. We struggle to protect what we can't relate to value what doesn't operate on our terms. A giant isopod that might not eat for years, that moves so slowly its progress is measured in meters per week, doesn't inspire the same protective instincts as charismatic megafauna. But its survival strategy is no less sophisticated, no less worthy of preservation. Just harder to anthropomorphize, harder to market, harder to defend in budget meetings. The Antarctic Ocean continues its slow seasonal rhythm regardless. Summer blooms still explode across the undersides of sea ice. Krill still swarm in numbers beyond counting. Whales still migrate south to feed. The ecosystem functions for now, much as it has for millions of years. The changes are subtle, visible only to those watching carefully, measuring consistently, comparing data across decades. A few degrees warmer here, slightly fewer krill there. Crabs appearing in locations they've never been documented before. Small shifts that compound into transformation. This is how worlds end in the 21st century. Not with apocalyptic fanfare, but through accumulation, through incremental change that seems manageable until it isn't, until thresholds get crossed and systems reorganize around new equilibriums that exclude the species that once defined them. The Antarctic giants may already be living in borrowed time, their extinctions delayed but not prevented, their final generations swimming through waters that are already becoming something else. What comes after them will be interesting, certainly. Evolution abhors a vacuum. New species will adapt to warmer Antarctic waters. Ecosystems will reorganize around different principles, different organisms, different rules. Life will persist because life always persists. But it won't be the same. It won't have the same strange beauty, the same impossible grandeur, the same quiet defiance of everything we thought we knew about survival. It will be something else entirely, probably faster, probably smaller, probably more familiar. And in becoming familiar, it will lose the power to astonish us, to remind us that our way of being alive isn't the only way. The giants of the Antarctic abyss may vanish. Their ecosystems may transform beyond recognition. But the questions they raised, the wonder they inspired, the humility they demanded, those can persist if we let them. If we remember that the deep, cold ocean once held creatures so magnificently adapted to impossible conditions that their very existence seemed like biology's own kind of magic. If we let that memory shape how we think about the future, about what we're willing to protect, about what we're willing to change in ourselves to prevent further loss. The silence approaching isn't inevitable. The invasion isn't unstoppable. The warming can be slowed, but only if we treat this moment for what it actually is. Not just an environmental crisis or a conservation challenge, a choice about what kind of world we want to leave behind. Whether we're comfortable being the generation that let the Antarctic giants, 30 million years of evolutionary magnificence, vanish because we couldn't imagine caring enough about creatures we'd never see, living lives we'd never understand, in waters we'd never enter. The deep remains deep, the cold remains cold, for now. And somewhere in that darkness, a glass sponge continues its patient work of filtering water, building its silicate cathedral one molecule at a time, completely unaware that the world above has decided its fate. That image should haunt us more than it does. The deep ocean doesn't know we exist. That fact should comfort us, but it doesn't. Because while the abyss remains indifferent to human concerns, we've already reached down through thousands of meters of cold black water and touched it, changed it, set in motion transformations that will outlast nations, languages, entire civilizations. The Antarctic giants aren't asking for our help. They can't. Their world operates on frequencies we barely register. A creature that lives 5 centuries experiences our entire industrial revolution as a brief disturbance, a sudden warming that arrives without warning or explanation. From their perspective, if they have one we'd recognize, the invasion must seem like the ocean itself has betrayed them. The water that protected them for millions of years is now delivering their replacements. We've spent this journey in the cold and dark, meeting organisms so strange they barely seem real. Sea spiders with organs in their legs, fish without blood, sponges older than pyramids, sharks that drift through centuries like ghosts. Each one a masterpiece of adaptation, a solution to problems we didn't know could be solved. And each one vulnerable in ways their evolution never prepared them for. The tragedy isn't that they're dying. Everything dies eventually. The tragedy is the speed. The Antarctic Ocean is being transformed faster than geological time can respond, faster than evolution can adapt, faster than these slow-burning metabolisms can even register what's happening. A glass sponge that's been filtering water since humans lived in caves will shatter under a crab's claw without ever understanding why the rules changed. This isn't nature's cruelty. Nature has no opinion about crabs or sponges. This is physics responding to chemistry, heat following energy gradients, organisms expanding into newly available habitat. The crabs aren't villains. They're just alive, doing what evolution programmed them to do. The real architects of this invasion live thousands of miles away, burning fuel, generating power, releasing carbon into an atmosphere that eventually delivers heat to the deepest waters. We tend to imagine environmental catastrophes as dramatic: forests burning, reefs bleaching, species vanishing in observable ways. But the Antarctic transformation is quieter. It happens in darkness. It affects creatures most people will never see, in waters most will never think about. The giants die without witnesses. Their ecosystems reorganize in silence. And because it's happening slowly, incrementally, out of sight, it's easy to pretend it's not happening at all. But it is, right now, while we speak, while we sleep, while we debate policy and argue about costs and delay action for another quarter, another year, another election cycle. The warming continues. The crabs advance. The giants retreat, and the window for preventing the worst outcomes grows narrower with each passing season. Some will say it's too late, that the damage is already done, the warming already locked in, the invasion already established beyond any hope of reversal. They might be right. The Antarctic Ocean will likely never return to its pre-industrial state, at least not on any timescale humans can comprehend. The fortress has been breached. The conditions that created the giants are dissolving. But too late for what, exactly? Too late to preserve the ecosystem exactly as it was? Probably. Too late to save every species? Almost certainly. But too late to matter? No. Because what we do now determines how much is lost. Whether the giants vanish completely or persist in isolated refugees. Whether the transformation is total or partial. Whether future generations inherit an ocean that still contains wonder, or one that's been simplified into something ordinary. The choice isn't between perfect preservation and total loss. It's between bad outcomes and catastrophic ones. Between a world that loses some of its biological richness and one that loses most of it. Between maintaining refugees where ancient strategies can survive and watching those strategies disappear entirely. The difference matters profoundly, even if it's not the difference we'd prefer to be fighting for. Every fraction of a degree matters. Every year we slow the warming matters. Every population that survives matters. Not because individual organisms are precious in some cosmic sense, though they are, but because they represent possibilities. Different ways of being alive. Alternative solutions to existence that took millions of years to develop and can never be recreated once lost. The Antarctic giants won't thank us for protecting them. They'll never know we tried. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the measure of civilization isn't how we treat beings who can petition us, who can make their case, who can appeal to our emotions. Maybe it's how we treat beings who can't, who exist entirely outside our moral frameworks, our political systems, our economic calculations, who simply are, in ways we barely understand, following strategies we're only beginning to appreciate. The deep ocean has always been alien to us. Cold where we need warmth, dark where we need light, pressurized where we need air. We can visit but never belong, and yet we've managed to reach even there with our consequences. Our choices ripple downward through kilometers of water to touch creatures that have never seen sunlight, that operate on metabolism slower than our heartbeats, that live lives so foreign to our experience they might as well be from another planet. That reach, that influence, comes with responsibility we never asked for and can't escape. The Antarctic giants exist at our mercy now, whether we like it or not. Whether we acknowledge it or not, their survival depends on decisions being made in capitals and boardrooms, on policies and technologies, and choices about how we power our world. They have no vote, no voice, no representation, just existence, and the hope that existence matters to someone, somewhere, who has the power to act. The silence we've been circling, that approaching quiet when the last glass forest crumbles and the final giant isopod succumbs and the ecosystem reorganizes around faster, simpler, more familiar forms, that silence doesn't have to be complete. Refuges can be maintained, populations can persist, the transformation can be partial rather than total, but only if we decide that matters. Only if we choose to value what we're losing highly enough to actually change the behaviors causing the loss. This isn't a problem technology alone can solve. We can't engineer our way out of climate change while maintaining business as usual. We can't protect the Antarctic giants while continuing to warm their ocean. The physics doesn't allow for comfortable half measures. Either we reduce emissions dramatically, quickly, or we continue cooking the planet and everything in it. The giants are just the canary, the early warning system showing us what happens when conditions shift faster than adaptation allows. Their message is clear. Stability matters. Time matters. When you remove both simultaneously, even the most successful organisms fail. Even strategies refined across millions of years collapse. Even giants fall. And if it can happen to them in the most remote ecosystem on Earth, it can happen anywhere, to anyone, including us. We like to imagine ourselves as separate from nature, above it, immune to its rules, but we're not. We're just faster. Our metabolisms burn hotter. Our lives pass quicker. Our adaptations come through culture rather than genetics. But we still depend on stable conditions, still require specific temperature ranges, still need ecosystems to function. And when those systems begin failing, when stability disappears, we'll discover we're not so different from the giants after all, just operating on a different timescale. The Antarctic Ocean will continue, water will flow, ice will form, darkness will persist. But what lives in that water, under that ice, within that darkness, that can change completely. We're in the process of changing it right now. The question isn't whether we're powerful enough to transform the abyss. We've already proven we are. The question is whether we're wise enough to stop. The giants can't tell us what they need. They don't have the language, don't have the platform, can't make themselves sympathetic to humans who will never see them, but their needs are simple. Cold water, dark water, stable water. The same conditions their ancestors had for 30 million years. All we have to do is stop making their ocean warmer. Stop breaking down the barriers that protected them. Stop transforming their fortress into a highway for invasions. Simple needs, monumentally difficult solutions, because meeting those needs requires us to change, to reorganize economies, to rebuild infrastructure, to value long-term stability over short-term profit, to care about creatures we'll never meet in waters we'll never enter, to accept that our comfort might need to decrease so their survival can continue. These aren't technical challenges, they're moral ones. Choices about what matters and who counts, and how much we're willing to sacrifice for beings that can't demand it. The slow life of the Antarctic abyss continues for now. Glass sponges filter, isopods wait, sea spiders hunt, sleeper sharks drift, krill swarm. The machinery of a 30-million-year-old ecosystem keeps running, worn and stressed, but still functional. Still capable of inspiring wonder in those willing to look. Still teaching lessons about patience, efficiency, and the profound possibilities available when life has time and stability to experiment. How much longer that continues depends entirely on us. Not the scientists studying the invasion, not the policymakers debating targets, not the activists demanding change. All of us. Every choice about energy, every decision about consumption, every vote cast, every priority established. It all compounds into outcomes that ripple down through kilometers of cold water to determine whether the giants survive or vanish. The deep doesn't judge us. It simply responds. Change the temperature and the ecosystem changes. The rest follows with mathematical certainty. No malice, no mercy. Just physics and biology playing out according to rules we understand but seem unable to follow. Somewhere in the darkness right now, a glass sponge is adding another microscopic layer of silica to its structure. It's been doing this for thousands of years. It will continue until something stops it. That something might be a crab's claw, or it might be water too warm to sustain its metabolism, or it might be a future we haven't written yet, where the warming slows, the barriers hold, and ancient strategies survive in cold refuges we chose to protect. The ending isn't written. The giants are still there. The ice still forms. The darkness persists. And in that darkness, patient and slow and magnificent, life continues doing what it's done since before humans existed, growing, adapting, surviving, waiting to see if we'll give it the one thing it needs most: time.